The morning began like any other in the mountains, quiet, crisp, and alive with small sounds that belonged entirely to the ridge. Frost glazed the porch rail in silver. A thin veil of fog hung low over the pines, and the lazy chatter of chickadees carried across the air. The world at this height felt slower, stripped of noise except for the hiss of the wind through the needles and the groan of logs settling in the cabin walls. I had just wrapped my fingers around a steaming mug of strong, black coffee when a voice that didn't belong to these woods shattered the calm. "Your daughter is trespassing." The words hit the cabin's frame like a hammer. I paused with the mug still pressed near my lips and stepped toward the door. The tone was shrill, sharp, a voice accustomed not to asking but demanding. When I opened the door, I found her, a stranger standing tall in my yard, neon pink tracksuit blazing against the muted mountain colors, arms crossed tightly enough for the synthetic fabric to squeak in the cold morning air. The Cadillac SUV she had driven up in was parked sideways across my gravel drive like a blockade. Her sunglasses were oversized, reflecting the light of morning in cold little flashes. "Excuse me?" I asked, voice low, calm, still enjoying the steam from my cup. She jabbed a manicured finger toward the cabin interior behind me, her expression twisted with fury. "I already called the police. You're harboring a minor who doesn't belong here. You will hand her over immediately!" The sheer audacity of the claim made me blink once before my lips tugged upward into a grin. I struggled to hide behind my mug. See, my teenage daughter Sarah was standing right behind me, still in her pajama pants, phone raised high, recording the entire interaction with calm delight. This woman in the tracksuit had no idea she wasn't just yelling at a mountain dad trying to enjoy his coffee. She was accusing the sheriff of the entire county of harboring a trespasser on his own land, which made me both her landlord and the law. Karen was because she was unmistakably a Karen and wasn't privy to that information yet. She had decided on her script and stuck to it with manic glee. "I'm telling you right now," she shrieked, pulling out her phone. "She is not allowed to be here. She has no claim, no permission. She's a trespassing juvenile delinquent, and I will involve higher authorities." She turned her back to me dramatically, thumb already pounding 911 as if she was calling in an airstrike. "Dispatch, I need immediate backup," she shouted into the phone. "A squatter is holding a child hostage up at the cabin on Miller Ridge." I almost offered to patch her through directly myself, just so I had a front row seat to the moment she realized the truth. Inside, Sarah bit her lip to hold back laughter, but her phone never wavered, her camera catching every manic word. When the dispatcher inevitably informed her just who she was accusing, Karen's tone spiked into a higher register, disbelief flooding in waves. "No," she barked. "I don't care who you think it is. Send someone real." That was when she spun around and her gaze finally fell on the patrol cruiser parked just past my woodshed. Frost still clung to its windows, the sheriff's star on the driver door glittering in the rising sun. Her face shifted like a storm breaking, moving from righteousness to confusion to sheer insult in record time. "That's not real," she spat, stabbing a finger toward the cruiser. "That's set dressing." "You can't possibly be." I slid my badge from my belt and dangled it between two fingers, letting the morning light play across the embossed star. "You were saying?" For half a second her eyes widened, a crack in her certainty. But then, as Karens of the world always do, she doubled down. "That's fake," she screeched, voice quivering with indignation. "You think you can intimidate me with props? I'll bring the real police. You're impersonating an officer and you'll regret this." Sarah couldn't help it then. Laughter burst free, a stream of giggles that turned into a full grin. She panned her phone deliberately, catching both my badge and the woman's furious denial in the same shot. Karen snapped at her. "Put the phone down, young lady. This is evidence." "No problem," Sarah said sweetly. "I'll make sure the whole county sees the evidence." Karen froze at that, mouth snapping shut before spinning in place, sneakers crunching hard over gravel. She stomped back toward her SUV, phone pressed to her ear again, barking into the line about conspiracies and child endangerment. Gravel spat from her tires as she shot backward out of my drive, the sound fading down the mountain road until only the wind remained. I exhaled into the quiet and turned to Sarah, who still had her phone raised. She smirked and lifted an eyebrow. "Think she'll be back?" she asked. I took a long sip of coffee, letting it burn warm down to my chest. "Oh, she'll be back. People like her don't know how to lose. And when they come back, they never come alone." Not enough just to be wrong. They need a whole audience to be wrong with them. Sarah's smile widened with mischief. Then I better clear more storage on my phone. I chuckled and leaned against the porch rail, listening to the woods reclaim the silence. The creek burbled faintly below, the branches swayed overhead, and the mountain tried to remind me that peace here was old and rooted, more permanent than neon pink tracksuits and petty entitlement could ever reach. But I also knew the game had changed. The line between isolation and intrusion had been crossed the moment she'd set foot up my drive and pounded her accusations into the morning frost. This wasn't just Karen versus Sheriff anymore. This was going to be Karen versus reality, and the mountain has always had a cruel way of teaching reality to those who thought they could bend it. Sure enough, by late morning, the silence cracked again. My radio clipped against the cabin wall burst with static. "Sheriff, you there?" came my deputy's voice. "I'm here," I answered coolly. "You're not going to believe this," he said, his tone half amused, half weary. "Some lady just flagged down a pair of town cops at the gas station. Claimed the county sheriff was holding a minor hostage at the old Miller place, my cabin." I closed my eyes, smiling tight. "Sit tight," I told him. "I'll handle it myself." Static cackled as he tried and failed to hide his laugh. "Copy that," he said. "Can't wait to hear how this circus ends." When I set the radio down, Sarah was standing there, eyebrow raised, phone ready. "She's not done, is she?" "Nope," I said. "She's just getting warmed up." I leaned against the porch again, coffee refilling the mug's empty space with warmth. While down the ridge somewhere, I imagined Karen regrouping, rallying her make-believe soldiers and cooking up fresh declarations of authority with the HOA she claimed as her crown. The knock at the cabin door had been just the first strike. The war was coming. It should have ended with that first knock. Any sensible person who realized they'd just accused the sheriff of squatting in his own cabin would have vanished down the mountain in embarrassment, tail tucked, visor hiding a face too red to show. But Karen wasn't sensible. She was entitled, and entitlement never walks away when it loses, it recruits. The quiet that followed her first retreat didn't feel like peace. It felt like waiting. Even Sarah felt it. She hung around that morning with her phone charged, editing clips of the fiasco into neat, humiliating reels. Every laugh, every shriek, every crack in Karen's voice had been caught, and the footage was airtight. "This could go viral in an hour," she announced smugly as she added timestamps. I told her to hold off. This wasn't about viral videos or likes. This was about law, dignity, and lines in the sand. And I had a sinking, gut-deep certainty Karen wasn't finished testing that line. By noon, my suspicion proved true. The crunch of tires echoed up the road, heavier and messier this time. I stepped out onto the porch, mug in hand, and there she was again, pink tracksuit blazing, Cadillac clogging the gravel. But now she wasn't alone. 3 HOA board members climbed reluctantly out of the car behind her, adjusting jackets, looking like men dragged to a fight they wanted no part of. Their clipboards pressed against their chests like shields. And parked just nose to nose with my cruiser were 2 small town patrol cars, lights lazily flickering, as if even the officers inside weren't convinced why they were here. Sarah leaned out the cabin's window mid-sandwich, waving cheerfully at the scene. She chewed slowly, deliberately, chin high like she was watching a parade staged just for her entertainment. Karen pointed dramatically at her. "You see her? You see the miner I told you about? He has her locked in there. I demand you remove her immediately." I set my coffee down, walked casually down the steps, and stopped beneath the porch, badge gleaming on my belt where all could see. "Morning, officers," I said evenly. The 2 patrolmen climbed out, looking more uncomfortable with each step. They tried to start neutral, as a good officer should. "Sir, we need to see some ID." His eyes flicked to my badge patches stitched on my shirt, then down to the cruiser with the sheriff's star parked behind me. Hesitation thickened his voice. Karen cackled high and triumphant like they'd just slapped cuffs on me. "Yes, arrest him. Impersonating an officer is a felony." "You have to." Sarah burst into laughter, camera phone still aimed. The sound gutted Karen's rhythm, but she pushed on louder now, as though volume could drown reality. "Ma'am," one officer tried gently, "can we see any documentation proving this property is yours?" She whipped out a fat folder with dramatic flair. Paper spilled from it. Printouts from online real estate apps, maps with neon highlighter lines, post-it notes dangling like confetti. "The deed," she barked. "Historic rights. Family inheritance." I slipped one hand to my satchel and held up my county-sealed property survey in answer. Clean, laminated, notarized, the kind of document no amount of highlighter could fake. I held it steady where the HOA men could read. One of them, round-faced, clearly exhausted, stepped forward nervously, glanced at my survey, then looked back at his own clipboard notes. His face fractured honesty, and then, quietly, almost apologetically, he simply took 2 steps back away from Karen's side. Karen saw it, whirled on him, screeched, "Traitor!" But the damage was done. Cracks always begin quiet. The town officers handed my ID back reluctantly, still pretending neutrality, though their faces said it plain. This was absurd. Sarah leaned out the window to sip her soda loudly, letting the straw squeak for maximum mockery. Karen doubled down. "This so-called sheriff is a fraud. Do you know how easy it is to order fake badges online? Those patches are costumes. Look at this cabin, it's primitive. A real sheriff wouldn't live like this. Arrest him. Arrest him and free that child." Her volume climbed so high it pierced against the pines. I turned to the officers, calm as always. "Would you like to step inside? Compare county maps to hers? Meet the supposed hostage?" As if on cue, Sarah swung the door open and leaned against the frame. Chip bag under one arm, grin wide, pajama pants glaring in plaid. "Hey, officers," she said with salty nonchalance. "Enjoying the circus?" She toasted them with her soda can, unbothered. The young officer cracked a smile before catching himself. Karen reset immediately, voice shrill. "She is under duress," she cried. "She's brainwashed, manipulated. He told her to say that. Why aren't you listening?" Finally, the older officer rubbed his temples and muttered so quiet only I, standing closest, heard it. "God help me." Sarah caught it on her mic anyway. Karen wasn't done. She turned to the HOA men again, jabbing her finger. "Present the papers. Don't just stand there. Prove our right to this property." The tired man she'd dragged along visibly winced, flipping through his files. Every page he pulled looked out of date. One even labeled the cabin site as vacant hunting shack. He mumbled something about this needing review, but Karen snatched the notes from his hand, waving them overhead. "These are the true maps. These override everything." I let her swing them high, voice shrieking sharp enough for Sarah to giggle. Then, without raising my tone, I stepped forward. "Karen," I said low, "this land is mine. Bought, paid, signed through the county. Taxes up to date. And you've accused me of crimes in front of officers who know exactly who I am. You're done here." For a moment, for the briefest flicker, her voice cracked. Her certainty faltered long enough that silence cut between words. Then, exactly as predicted, she doubled down again. "This isn't over," she hissed, spinning toward her car. "This is an outrage. I won't stop until you're dragged out and charged." She stomped past the HOA men, practically tearing the papers as she stuffed them back. The 2 patrol cars lingered in embarrassed quiet before following her back down the drive. Lights off now. No sirens. The scene dissolved almost anticlimactic except for Sarah's open laughter spilling loud down the porch. "Did you hear her?" Sarah wheezed, clutching her stomach. "Costumes. Fake sheriff. Too primitive to be real. Oh my God," I chuckled despite myself. "People like her never lose gracefully." Sarah tilted her phone screen toward me where the red recording indicator still burned bright. "Don't worry," she said with relish. "The world's gonna love episode 2. She wasn't wrong. The calm rolled back as quickly as it had gone. The trees stiffened again in frost. The ridge echoed with only wind. But we all knew what I told Sarah the first time. Women like Karen never come alone once they gather allies. Next time, it wouldn't just be HOA board members and a few officers humoring her. Next time, she'd make it bigger, louder, demand more attention, and somewhere, through layers of noise, the truth would stand tall and waiting. For now, though, I picked my coffee back up and leaned on the porch rail beneath the waiting quiet. Sarah replayed footage of Karen's shrieks as if editing a comedy reel. The Cadillac tire marks were still etched deep into my gravel drive. The circus had come and gone, but it would be back. By the time the sun cut through the fog the next morning, I was already expecting her. It's a strange thing to sense trouble before it arrives. Not by magic, not even by specific signs, but by knowing a certain kind of person. The mountain was quiet, but not peaceful. Too still, too tense. Even Sarah noticed when she came into the kitchen, phone in hand as always. "She's coming," she whispered like an actress about to cue the villain. She was right. The crunch of tires on gravel came closer, first slow, then sharp, as if to announce her arrival. Through the window I saw it. Karen again, neon pink searing against the muted greens and browns of the mountain. But this time she didn't come alone. 2 SUVs rolled up in convoy, engines grumbling louder than the dignity of anyone inside deserved. Out stepped Tom, the so-called HOA president, a tired man I'd only seen in town a handful of times. Clipboard pressed to his chest like a shield, eyes weary, shoulders slumped in the weight of leadership he clearly regretted. Beside him came Denise, another board member, her jacket neat, her eyes darting everywhere but mine. And there was Karen, of course, strutting ahead like the crowned queen of every pine needle on the ridge, arms swinging, chin high, fury preloaded into every step. She didn't even knock this time. She stormed straight up the path, waving papers overhead like they were holy scripture, voice already carrying. "This entire cabin is illegally deeded," she screamed, visor bouncing. "This land belongs to the community, and I am here with the legal authority to demand you vacate immediately." Behind her, Tom shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Denise attempted a polite smile in my direction, but failed. Her lips twitched like she wanted to say sorry, but Karen's presence glued her mouth shut. I stood calmly on the porch, mug in hand, badge on my belt clearly displayed. Sarah leaned against the doorway by my side, pajama pants still on, phone held high in recording mode. She smirked at me and whispered, "Episode 3. Karen slammed her stack of papers onto my porch railing with such force the frost rattled off. The pages were wrinkled internet printouts, highlighted within an inch of their life with sticky notes plastered so heavily they looked like a middle school science project. "Here, proof," she barked. "This cabin sits on land improperly surveyed in the 60s. Every claim you think you own is invalid." We checked. "Isn't that right, Tom?" Tom nearly dropped his clipboard. Well, Karen, I haven't reviewed county records myself, but..." "Exactly," she snapped, not letting him finish. "The board has authorized inspection and repossession until this mess is sorted." I chuckled. "Repossession? Fascinating. Tell me, Tom, do you want to see how many times I've paid the county taxes since then? Or would the county clerk's notarized documents be enough?" Karen curled her lip. "Documents are easy to fake. Anyone can forge records." "Sure," I said dryly. "But forging a deed and 10 years of receipts would probably be more exhausting than standing here holding highlighters." Behind me, Sarah stifled a laugh that slipped into her recording audio. Denise coughed as if to cover her own chuckle. Tom looked at the ground. For a moment, only Karen's breathing, hard, fast, frantic, filled the air. Then came the next wave, as if perfectly timed. 2 patrol cars rolled up, lights pulsing against the daylight. 2 young officers stepped out warily, hands resting on their belts, eyes flicking between me standing calmly in front of my own home and the chaos of Karen's entourage. Karen spread her arms like a showwoman introducing her act. "Finally! Real law enforcement! Arrest him! He's impersonating an officer and holding a child hostage in that cabin." The officers blinked, then saw me clearly. My badge, my patches. The cruiser parked behind the shed with frost still clinging. Recognition hit their faces immediately. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy pacing. "Don't let the costume fool you," she barked. "He's a fraud. This cabin is my family's inheritance." "Demand his ID! Demand his badge!" Sarah stepped forward in perfect comedic timing, holding out a chip bag and munching loudly. "Hostage status, fed and watered," she deadpanned to the officers. Both cracked involuntary grins before trying to straighten their faces. Karen gaped. "See?" Karen screamed. "She's been coerced into performing. He brainwashed her. He told her what to say." I sighed, reached slowly to my belt and held my badge right in front of the closest officer, who didn't even need to examine it long. He nodded, gave me the look of a man who wanted to apologize but settled for professionalism. Karen saw the nod and snapped. She shoved papers into their hands. "Don't you dare take his side. Look at the proof. Wrong surveys, abandoned hunting shack, misdrawn boundaries when it's all here." One officer glanced at the papers. His brow furrowed, but not from conviction, from confusion. This wasn't legal proof. This was desperate scribbling. I held out my survey map, laminated, signatures crisp, 20 stamps across its edges. This is county filed. Not hacked off a website. Compare them. The officer did. The difference was stark. Tom wilted visibly, peeling himself further from Karen's shoulder. Denise's lips pressed to hide her embarrassment, but Karen wasn't through. She doubled down again. All part of the conspiracy.
Everyone here's corrupt.
This whole town's been hijacked, and I am the only one willing to call it out, Sarah whispered. Drink every time she says conspiracy, Dad. Loud enough for her mic to catch. I leaned against the porch rail, tired but steady. Karen, do you know what happens when you make false police reports? I asked, or forge property claims? Or waste the time of officers who could actually be helping someone? She glared like daggers could cut. I know my rights. You can't silence me. The younger officer sighed, glancing at Sarah's camera knowingly. Ma'am, he said carefully, it looks like this man is indeed Sheriff Caldwell. And these surveys, he shook the laminated deed gently, carry legal weight. We have no probable cause here. Karen's jaw opened, closed. For a pulsing second, she actually looked stunned. Then her voice rose again like a strangled kettle scream. This is not over. You're all in on it! Every last one of you. But the truth will come out. She spun, stomped toward her Cadillac, barking at Tom and Denise to follow. The two hesitated in shame before trudging reluctantly after. She slammed her car door hard enough to rattle the windows. Gravel spat from her tires as she peeled down the drive, dust trailing like smoke from a battlefield. The officers stayed behind. One let out a long sigh. The other glanced at me. You okay if we don't write a report for this? I raised my mug. Fine by me, I said. They chuckled, shook their heads, and rolled off slowly down the gravel as if already dreading the paperwork she might dump on them next. The cabin grew quiet again. Birds returned cautiously to the trees. Sarah beamed at her phone. Best footage yet, she announced. We'll call this one Karen versus HOA versus Cops versus Reality. I chuckled despite myself, because she was right. But I also knew this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't stop when they fail. They only escalate. She had burned her credibility here, in front of officers and board members both, but that wouldn't slow her. It would only fuel her. I leaned on the porch rail longer, watching the Cadillac tire gouges scar the gravel like claw marks. This was just Act 1, I muttered. Sarah smirked. Good thing I've got extra cloud storage. And the mountain, as always, settled around us. But in that settling, one truth hummed steady. The HOA circus had come to my porch. And it would roll back. Bigger, louder, madder. But no matter how many highlighted printouts, false claims, or pink tracksuits marched up this mountain, my deed, my badge, and my patience stood taller. The line was drawn, and no circus in the world was going to redraw it. The mountain had fallen still again, but it wasn't peace. Anyone with a shred of sense could feel the tension. Even the birds sang softer that day, as if they knew the ridge was about to echo with human noise far louder than their wings. By the following afternoon, it was official. Karen wasn't going to let the porch debacle be her final act. She had a taste for spectacle, and the only stage left was my office, the county sheriff's station. That morning when the call came across dispatch, I didn't even need the details. I knew. Sheriff, dispatch said, voice tight with the kind of irritation only Karen could provoke. She's here at the front desk, claims you're impersonating yourself, holding a juvenile hostage and squatting in her mountain cabin. She's demanding you be arrested immediately. I pinched the bridge of my nose, exhaling slowly through a dry laugh. Of course she is. Put her in the waiting area. I'll be there in 10. Sarah was already giggling before I even hung up. Please tell me we're filming this, Dad. Her phone was out before I answered. When we arrived, the scene hit like a bad sitcom playing out on fast forward. Karen stood in front of the reception desk, arms flailing, papers spilling everywhere, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She pointed at every deputy who dared glance at her. Actors, plants, none of these people actually work here. He's running a fraudulent law office to intimidate me. The poor desk sergeant sat stiff as a post, lips pressed tight, fighting desperately not to laugh. Deputies milled around the coffee machine, hiding smirks behind cups. They'd seen me drag in armed suspects without a fuss, but Karen in her neon tracksuit had the entire department rattled with secondhand embarrassment. When she spotted me walking in, her volume jumped another octave. There, that's him. That's the man impersonating your sheriff badge. Arrest him immediately before he brainwashes another child. Sarah, never one to waste a moment, aimed her camera high enough to catch the badge glinting on my hip, the embroidered patches on my shoulders, and the county crest stitched over my chest. She whispered for the mic, "Behold the world's least convincing fake." Karen jabbed her finger. "You, sit down. You don't have authority here." I removed my hat deliberately, set it on the table in front of her, and lowered myself into the chair across. "Why don't you finish your presentation?" I said, voice steady. "I'd like to hear the crimes you're charging me with today." Her mouth twitched, not used to opponents who didn't shout back. But then she dove headlong into her rant, firing accusations faster than she could think. I forged my deed. I kidnapped my daughter. I stole from generations of rightful landowners. I set up decoy deputies across the county to give legitimacy to my masquerade. Her papers flew across the table like confetti at a parade. I didn't interrupt. The trick with people like her is never to stop them. Rope in hand, better to let them hang themselves clean. When she finally gasped for breath, I leaned back, calm. "Are you finished, ma'am?" "Don't you ma'am me," she shrieked. I motioned for the sergeant behind the desk. "Would you please pull up my employment record?" In less than 30 seconds, the monitor flashed with my name. Sheriff Daniel Caldwell, 10 years of payroll, tax records, retirement plan contributions. My photograph on screen. The exact same one hanging in the hallway beside every past serving sheriff. Karen froze, her lips quivering in confusion so awkward it pulled the air still. Then she snapped back, voice cracking with desperation. "Fake, designed by your cronies. I demand outside verification." That was about when Tom and Denise shuffled timidly into the room. Karen's board members. Their expressions looked worn, as if they'd both aged 5 years since she'd dragged them up my deck. They stood awkwardly near the wall, clipboards dangling like dead weights. "Great," I drawled. "Why don't you tell us what you saw on the porch this morning?" Karen spun on them instantly, spitting fury. "Don't you dare speak unless it's to defend me!" Tom looked like he might faint. He cleared his throat, glanced at me, then at the deputies, then back at Karen. Sheriff, if I can be honest, Karen may not have presented all the facts when she brought us up the mountain." Karen lunged forward, hissing. "Traitor." Denise crossed her arms, finally finding her courage. "We checked our HOA records after leaving. There's no claim on that land. It's not in our jurisdiction. Karen told us it was abandoned government property she was reclaiming." Silence dropped hard across the station. Deputies stopped moving, turned openly now, listening like kids to a bedtime story. Karen's face flushed purple. "Lies!" she shouted. "He's turned you all against me. You were promised—" She caught herself too late. "Promised what exactly?" I asked softly. Tom rubbed his temples. She said maybe we'd have weekends at the cabin if we helped her file a complaint." The deputies choked on laughter so badly one had to step into the hall. Sarah, standing by the desk, whispered gleefully into her mic. "And there it is, folks. Bribery Mountain Edition." Karen shrieked louder, lunging for the file folder in my hand. I slid it back smoothly and she slipped on the tiled floor, nearly sprawling. The deputy stepped in instinctively, gently redirecting her into a chair again. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, lips twitching, "you filed false police reports, harassed an elected sheriff, and attempted to forge property claims. Are we going to have to process this formally?" That word and process snapped Karen into fresh gear. She broke into tears. Suddenly the shrieks turned to sobs, heaving gasps loud enough for anyone still unconvinced to pity her. "I was scared for my family," she cried. I didn't know where else to turn. He threatened me. He waved his gun at me and my board. "Gun?" Deputy Ramirez interjected flatly. I was there on the porch. He never even unbuckled his holster. He lifted his coffee like proof. Sarah's phone captured every second of her new lie unraveling. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "Ma'am, we've been tolerant. We've let you vent, but you don't get to rewrite history. Not when the county maps say otherwise, not when 30 witnesses saw the truth, and not when every word is on camera." Karen's breaths came fast, shallow. Behind her sunglasses, I could see the panic cutting through her once smug certainty. When dispatch delivered the final blow, even my deputies couldn't hide their grins. Deputy Ramirez reappeared with a manila folder. "We checked into that lawyer she kept invoking. He's not licensed. He runs a $50 a month website that sells boilerplate letters labeled Official Legal Actions. The room erupted in exasperated chuckles. Even Tom groaned, covering his forehead with his hand. Denise muttered, "Good Lord." Karen lunged again, voice cracking like thin glass. "Conspiracy! Conspiracy!" This time no one even flinched. The performance had dulled. The curtain had fallen. I stood tall, stacking my neat file of deeds, tax receipts, and surveys. "Enough. You've had your stage. Now it's over. You'll be charged. Trespassing, harassment, false reporting. And the county clerk and judge will love hearing about forged HOA permissions." The sergeant nodded, voice firm. "Put her in temporary hold," he ordered quietly. "Let her cool off." As the deputies gently but firmly guided her down the hallway, Karen flailed, still shouting nonsense. "I am the rightful heir. The cabin is mine. He'll be dethroned for this. You'll all regret—" The click of the heavy door swallowed her voice. Sarah lowered her phone, finally exhaling from her laughter. "Episode 4, she said, her lips still curled into a grin. "The meltdown special." The deputies began clapping slowly, sarcastically, like an audience applauding a disastrous improv act. Tom slipped out quietly, muttering apologies. Denise following close behind, but offering me one polite nod as she left. A nod that said, Karen's reign over the HOA was finished, dethroned not by argument but by spectacle turned farce. I leaned back, finally sipping the lukewarm coffee I'd abandoned. The mountain was still waiting, cold and quiet in the dusk, only now its silence felt earned. But I knew Karen wasn't gone forever. People like her never evaporate. They linger, thirsting for one more shot at relevance. But her power in this town was broken, and with her circus-bleeding credibility in front of deputies, citizens and cameras alike, the next act had already been written. The collapse of a paper queen in a neon-pink tracksuit. By the time they led Karen into the temporary holding room, the fire in her voice had dimmed into scattered sparks, but she clutched at every last shred like she was fueling herself on fumes. Her neon tracksuit glared in the artificial light. She sat folded in a plastic chair, arms crossed so tightly the squeak of the cheap nylon filled each awkward silence. I watched her from across the glass, arms crossing my chest, letting exhaustion bleed into me for the first time that day. Not physical exhaustion, I had handled standoffs, winter rescues, even week-long manhunts without a blink. No, this was the unique weariness that only someone like Karen could inflict. A psychological storm of nonsense, half-truths and shrieked lies designed to make the simple impossible. Even then, under fluorescent buzz, she still muttered to herself about conspiracies, lawyers on their way, deeds hidden in mysterious family trunks. Whenever Tom and Denise's name slipped from her lips, it came with venom sharp enough to cut glass. She blamed them for betraying her, blamed the county clerk for discrimination, blamed her neighbors for cowardice. The only person she hadn't blamed was herself. I stepped inside, file thick in my hand, and set it on the table. The folder landed like a hammer, and she flinched before snapping her glare up at me. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're right," I answered calmly. "It isn't. It'll continue where it should, in court. With real judges, real clerks, and real evidence. Not the kind you print in fluorescent highlighter and pass off as law." Her eyes narrowed, lips pressed tight into a thin line. I opened the folder slowly, methodical. County survey maps, original deed, property tax records, signatures notarized across a decade. I laid them out one by one with the patience of a teacher showing letters to a stubborn child. "This cabin is mine," I said evenly. "The land is mine. My daughter is mine. And this badge," I pulled it from my belt, the star gleaming under buzzing white bulbs, "is mine. You have no authority here. You never did, and your tantrums didn't change that. All they did was waste everyone's time." Her jaw clenched, but her eyes betrayed her, darting not between me and the badge, but toward the glass where deputies Ramirez and Collins were watching, shoulders shaking with half-smothered laughter. Then came the final blow. The sergeant stepped in carrying another slim manila folder. Inside, the verification of her so-called lawyer. Fraudulent, unlicensed, nothing more than a cut-and-paste subscription scam. The sergeant set it down with quiet finality between us. Karen read the header upside down and her posture wavered. She didn't reach for it. She didn't need to. The sergeant's voice was calm but firmer than mine. "You will be charged trespassing, harassment, filing false police reports." Attempted fraud. That's 4 counts already. And if you keep threatening court officials, we'll tack on obstruction. Karen closed her mouth like a steel trap. For the first time since she had screeched up my drive in that Cadillac, she had no voice. You'll like jail, Sarah whispered softly from the doorway, phone in hand, capturing every word. Lots of white walls, very matching with your tracksuit. Karen jerked toward her. But seeing my daughter still alive, still smiling, still munching on a bag of chips she'd stolen from the vending machine, I think the realization hit. The very accusation Karen began with, that Sarah was a trespasser, a hostage, looked absurd now under fluorescent certainty. Karen muttered something, half a prayer, half a curse. You'll see. You think you're bigger than the board? Than the HOA? Than me? But people like me, she swallowed, voice cracking. We don't disappear. I rose, towering steady over her. Yes, you do. Maybe not in your own mind, but in everyone else's? I leaned forward just enough. You're finished. She snapped her head away, lips trembling. It took hours to finish. Statements from Tom and Denise. Copies of Sarah's video footage uploaded directly into secure evidence files. Ramirez drafted initial complaint forms while the sergeant logged each incident, tabbing through archived calls. As the paperwork grew, so did the realization across the department that this wasn't an isolated tantrum. This was a pattern, a reputation she'd built in town long before ever pointing her visor up my road. By dusk, she was processed, bond posted by some shell of a family fund she shouted about through the locked holding door. We let her go as procedure demanded, but her shadow limped different. She stormed out of that station smaller, shoulders hunched, words ragged. The paper crown she clung to had cracked. I drove Sarah back up the mountain under a sky painted in silver clouds. Snow hissed through the dark, the kind of flakes that didn't stick yet but whispered of the blanket coming. My daughter leaned her head against the window, phone still buzzing with notifications from neighbors texting thank yous. Dad, she said, voice teasing, we should start charging tickets. Karen versus Sheriff has better ratings than half the shows in town. I chuckled, shaking my head. This isn't a show. Sometimes fighting back feels like theater. But the law isn't about audiences. It's about drawing the line. She tapped her phone screen, smug. Well, your lines get amazing views. By the time we reached the cabin, dusk pressed down hard. Trees stood stark against the fading glow. The porch light flickered to life and our windows glowed warm golden against the snow-bitten air. I parked the truck and stepped out, scanning the tree line, listening, not for threats, but for peace. And for the first time in days, peace answered. Inside, Sarah curled into the couch, already queuing up edited snippets she promised would stay private, until Karen tried another stunt. My wife set out supper, maps still stacked neatly by the door in case anyone doubted twice. I carried my coffee back to the porch. The mountain whispered through the pines. The creek hummed under ice. Snow drifted gently across the drive where Cadillac tire scars had finally faded. People like Karen burned loud. They thrived on volume, on fear, on the quiet of neighbors who bowed their heads and said nothing. But when you dragged their noise into daylight, when you stood calmly with proof and patience, when you refused to bow, they collapsed. Every time from the ridge I could see down into the town. Porch lights glowed faint along the valley floor. Somewhere down there, Karen was scrolling through half-baked revenge plans, convincing herself she would rise again. But she wouldn't, not here. Not on my ridge. Not against my line, because here the records had spoken. The badge had spoken. And the silence of the mountain was louder than any shriek she could muster. I inhaled the sharp pine air, let the weight of the week roll off. Sarah laughed deep inside as more video clips played. The fire crackled in the hearth. The cabin walls held steady and strong. The circus was over. The queen in the pink tracksuit had collapsed. And the mountain once again was mine.